How immense was the Emperor's might? This thought haunts me each night as I struggle to drift off. I stood witness at Alinor, after all, just an ordinary remembrancer dispatched to chronicle his victory. The sanctioned chronicles depict a splendid clash where the Emperor felled the Orc chieftain with his blazing blade, a stirring saga to inspire youngsters on countless planets. Yet the scene I beheld that day unfolded in a wholly different manner. As the Orc lunged forward, the Emperor simply lifted his arm. No exertion, no tension, merely a casual motion, and existence itself shattered. The hulking greenskin didn't perish. It vanished outright. Nearby, even the Primarchs quivered and turned away from his sight. And when his eyes swept across me, all my recollections, every concealed wrongdoing I'd ever committed, stood exposed to an immense and unforgiving force. What sort of entity could dismantle the fabric of reality on a whim? What manner of sire could reshape the thoughts of his own progeny? I am Jalin Ma, once a chronicler during the Grand Crusade. These days I serve merely as guardian of a reality too horrific to erase and too perilous to reveal. The triumph at Ulanor. Uttering those terms alone stirs like chanting a spell, calling forth forces I've labored for decades to banish from my mind. Surely you've encountered the tales, the monumental conquest over the Greenskin realm, Horus Lupercal's ascension to War Master, the Emperor's withdrawal to Terra to labor on his clandestine endeavor buried under the palace, a cornerstone event in the Imperium saga, documented and retold endlessly over 10,000 years. But those versions you know amount to mere echoes, soothing deceptions. I can attest to that, since I contributed to their forging. The approved remembrancer narratives extol the Emperor's martial skill on that occasion, how he confronted the Orc leader Erlak Urg in personal duel and dispatched him with a sweep of his fiery sword, an epic confrontation pitting mankind's lord against the monster intent on consuming us. It forms a splendid myth. Young ones on a million worlds rest easier because of it. The actual events were far more straightforward and boundlessly more dreadful. I lingered there amid the human onlookers, an insignificant figure clutching a data slate and voxcaster charged with capturing the grandeur for future generations. One anonymous soul amid a vast throng of mortals, gazing as deities strode among us. The setup itself overwhelmed in its vastness, a whole valley reshaped into an arena vast enough to accommodate the gathered strength of several legion units. Hundreds of thousands of Imperial Army soldiers arrayed in ranks so exact that from where I stood they evoked golden wheat fields under the Olinor sun, their attire spotless even amid the grit that blanketed that accursed planet. And then came the Astartes, the Space Marines, the Angels of Death. No picture, no snapshot, no penned account can capture the essence of being near them. Everyone a pinnacle of engineered perfection, looming above ordinary folk, their plate shining with legion emblems, their immobility more daunting than any outburst of fury. Even they paled beside their gene-sires, the Primarchs, half-gods incarnate. I recall Magnus the Red, his lone eye blazing like a fresh-born sun, sanguineous, his pinions throwing a darkness that stretched impossibly far beyond natural bounds. Mortarion, a wraith of mortality whose aura left the atmosphere scant in my chest. Angren, raw fury scarcely leashed. Dorn, Korax, the Khan, all of them presences so commanding that direct scrutiny cracked something deep within your psyche. The realization of your utter tininess, your profound irrelevance, and still they orbited as lesser lights around the central blaze of that assembly. The Emperor. How to portray him? I've devoted 60 years to seeking the right phrases. My fingers still tremble as I set this down. It's not solely dread that provokes this quaking. It's the inherent failure of words themselves. He took the guise of a human. Every record concurs on that, but such a claim rings as hollow as declaring the sun a mere glow overhead. The degree of diminishment verges on sacrilege. The key point to grasp first is that he required no voice to seize focus, no motion to rule every expanse he entered. His bodily shape, awe-inspiring as it seemed, formed only the tiniest fragment of his aura. When the Emperor stepped onto the Olinor fields that day, I sensed him prior to spotting him. We all sensed it. a weight pressing at the temples, an abrupt sense of immense scrutiny converging on this precise instant and locale. The atmosphere grew laden not with static, but with significance, as if creation recalled it was under watch and snapped to sharper alertness. In that instant of his approach, I at last comprehended why certain souls dropped to the ground before divine apparitions. It wasn't about adoration, it was about endurance. Merely remaining upright in his aura demanded deliberate exertion, as if the pull of gravity had intensified 10 times over in his vicinity. His plating gleamed in gold, indeed. His visage exuded dignity, severity, and allure, surpassing the limits of human heredity. Such traits adorn countless murals and sculptures throughout the Imperium, yet they deceive, not through falsehood, but through omission. Gazing upon the Emperor revealed not merely the figure at hand, but an infinite array of potential futures. His features blended the vigor of youth with timeless age, compassion with ruthlessness, intimacy with profound otherness. Concentrating on a single trait caused the rest to ripple like images in rippled water. He embodied the spectrum of humanity's untapped promise, ever-shifting yet eternally poised. The grand parade unfolded as a ritual showcase of imperial dominance, with the emperor enthroned on an enormous gilded seat built specially for the event. Not the dreaded golden throne, but perhaps an emblematic forerunner. The legions paraded in formation before him. Armored vehicles and colossal war machines rumbled along, quaking the ground with every stride. The clamor was overwhelming, yet I retained no memory of its roar. Every sense dulled in his shadow, as if the cosmos itself paused in suspense. Time stretched on like this for hours, though its flow warped unnaturally. Then arrived the instant that reshaped my grasp of reality forever. It wasn't planned, nor woven into the meticulously staged ritual. Looking back, I ponder if he foresaw it, if he'd always foreseen it, if the whole extravaganza served solely as a setup for the unfolding drama. The Orc assault erupted abruptly, bursting from concealed shelters that Imperial troops had inexplicably missed during their area purge. Not a major offensive. No, the greenskin realm lay shattered. This was different. A final spasm of rebellion, a desperate strike to behead the Imperium at its pinnacle of victory. Leading them lumbered the biggest orc I'd ever encountered, surpassing even the chieftain whose demise had sparked the celebration. A brute armored in rough iron, bellowing a taunt that rattled the atmosphere. Subsequent reports dubbed it Urluk Urg, but I never heard its title uttered. Titles meant nothing in the chaos that ensued. The Emperor rose. That basic motion, lifting from his perch, quelled all, not merely speech but cognition. The cosmos shrank to a pinpoint of focus, riveted upon him alone. What transpired afterward gets labeled as combat in records. The sanctioned chronicles recount the Emperor unsheathing his blade, depict a duel between mankind's sovereign and the monstrosity. They narrate strikes traded, power pitted against power, finesse versus primal rage. All fabrication. The Emperor extended his arm, a mere flick of the wrist, fingers splayed forward, like bidding quiet or calling a halt. The orc stood roughly 200 meters off at that point. It barreled ahead, driven by hydraulic sinew and malice, a verdant torrent of ruin, and then it vanished. No burst of radiance, no warp-borne lance, no spectacular blast. In one heartbeat, the creature raged in protest. In the next, it was gone, not even ash. Utter erasure, so total that I doubted my own eyes. The quiet that ensued wasn't mere noiselessness, it was the void of all things, as if for an instant existence itself stuttered to a halt. What impressed me deepest was the ease. The Emperor hadn't tensed, hadn't rooted himself, hadn't mustered any force visible to onlookers. He'd merely willed the orc's non-existence, and reality obeyed without protest. That's when I spotted the Primarchs. These near-divine figures, these flawless entities crafted for domination and governance, knelt, not in rehearsed protocol for the right. They knelt like terrified youths. Some pressed their brows so close to the soil they almost grazed it. Others shook uncontrollably. Magnus the Red, the pinnacle of their psychic prowess, clutched his brow with both palms, a rivulet of crimson leaking from his lone eye. They'd witnessed, or felt, something mortals like us couldn't detect, a force outside our frail senses. Whatever annihilated the orc had shaken them to their core. And then the Emperor directed his sight toward the gathered throng. Words failed to capture the feeling as his regard swept across me. The experience eludes definition. It wasn't bodily. No burden, no squeeze, no ache. Yet it echoed all those. It was the abrupt, nightmarish revelation that my entire self, every past identity, every notion, emotion, secret, lay utterly bared, not scrutinized, not weighed, just comprehended. With a grasp so profound that my own self-awareness felt like a toddler's scribbled sketch by contrast, I caught in the tiniest sliver of time the essence of being utterly perceived by him. Not merely as a chronicler or a mortal soul, but as a mere cluster of particles briefly organized into a structure intricate enough to spark awareness, a transient form he could reshape or obliterate with far less trouble than I'd use to swat a fly. At that instant, I grasped what the Primarchs had long recognized, the reason they booed unbidden. The Emperor of mankind transcended mere superhumanity. He surpassed even the mightiest psyker. He embodied something wholly other, beyond any label or conceptual grasp we possess. The divide between him and his most exceptional offspring wasn't a matter of scale, but of essence itself. The remainder of the day blurred into haze. Ceremonies dragged on. Horus ascended to War Master, orations rang out, accolades were handed down. I captured it all on reflex, my fingers working mechanically as my thoughts locked in that pivotal epiphany. What I'd beheld wasn't the Emperor's capacity for forging or annihilating. It was his unchallenged sway over existence, a sovereignty that doesn't argue, conquer, or triumph. It simply endures, compelling all creation to curve toward it like rays around a black hole. That evening, secluded in my chambers, I examined my logs and uncovered something unsettling. The encounter with the orc had vanished. Instead, there was video of the Emperor clashing with the beast in standard melee, felling it with his blade in a showcase of tactical prowess. A valiant tableau, artfully framed, thrillingly conclusive, yet utterly fabricated. I reviewed additional clips, consulted other remembrancers. All recalled the identical doctored narrative, one swiftly solidifying as the sanctioned history. Come dawn, I started questioning my memory. Had I fabricated it? Had the event's strain, the crushing warp aura of the Emperor and his heirs, induced visions? Was this a typical mortal breakdown amid entities so vastly superior? That's when I sensed the scrutiny. Subtly, not overt. No guardians loomed at my threshold, no inquisitors poised for grilling. Yet over the ensuing weeks my path was gently steered. Tasks shifted, permissions to approach key figures curtailed under routine pretexts, isolation, probing, surveillance, to gauge if I'd voiced the anomaly, the sole truth lingering in my mind. I held my tongue. A primal urge for survival sealed my lips. I fulfilled my role, documented the polished tale, affixed my signature to the disseminated reports across the vast Imperium. But erasure eluded me. In the ensuing months, I drifted from frontline accounts of the Emperor and the Primarchs. Duties veered toward the fringes, spotlighting the Crusade's mortal facets, the rank-and-file troops, the freshly subdued planets, the dissemination of imperial customs and rule. Vital labor, essential labor, yet distant from the core of authority. I assured myself it was standard reassignment. No lone chronicler could chronicle the Emperor indefinitely. Deep down, I recognized the reality. I'd glimpsed the forbidden, retained the unmeant recollection, and he was aware. As the Great Crusade pressed onward and the Emperor withdrew to Terra, I persuaded myself the episode would dim in import, that any fleeting notice I'd attracted would scatter amid grander developments. I erred. The spectacle at Ulanor marked only the onset, an initial peek into a chasm so immense that even years on I grapple with its scope. Yet I press forward. Duty to verity compels it, perilous as it proves, solitary as my vigilance remains. The verity concerning the Emperor of mankind, his authentic essence, and its implications for every soul. In the wake of Ulanor, eerie visions invaded my rest. Not outright terrors, though they instilled an enduring chill. In them, I returned to that arid field, witnessing the victory's pageantry. But now, I wasn't just a bystander. I was the subject, examined with a focus that bored through skin and skeleton to my innermost spark. And invariably, as the orc disintegrated, I'd glance at myself to see my form unraveling to ash, not from limbs inward, but core outward, as if the vital essence defining me were methodically stripped, dooming the husk to crumble, voided. I'd jolt awake, heaving, pawing at my torso, desperately cataloging my thoughts. I clung to fragments of thoughts and recollections to convince myself that I remained intact, that my core identity endured. It was almost a full month before I grasped that these visions weren't mere erratic echoes of injury or pressure. They formed a signal, an alert. The sights I'd encountered were indelible, impossible to erase. The awareness I'd gained was irreversible, yet it might be suppressed, restrained, locked away beyond barriers of dread and survival instincts. That was the option presented to me: quietude and existence, or revelation and ruin. I opted for quietude. What alternative did I have? Thus, I pressed on with my role, chronicling the splendor of the grand campaign, capturing mankind's inevitable expansion across the cosmos. All the while, I harbored within a secret I scarcely allowed myself to contemplate, terrified that even the effort of remembering might summon his gaze anew. For a spell, this approach held. The nightmares tapered off in occurrence, even if they lingered faintly. I could resume my responsibilities, kept at a safe remove from the pinnacle of the Empire's authority. Existence took on a superficial air of routine. Then arrived the command. 3 years following Olenor, while serving with an exploratory armada under the Imperial fists, I was instructed to head back to Terra. No rationale offered, no objective mentioned, just an unyielding mandate. The voyage spanned weeks, time enough to mull over every conceivable motive for the recall, each possibility more alarming than the one before. When the shuttle pierced the Sol system, I'd persuaded myself that my return spelled doom, that the temporary reprieve I'd enjoyed had expired. What awaited was simultaneously less dire and more profound. At the landing field, no guardians or envoys of the Sigillite greeted me, but rather a lowly bureaucratic aide, a drab figure with a drab tone, who notified me of my transfer to the Bureau of Temporal Precision and Truth Authentication, a branch of the Remembrancer cadre, tasked with scrutinizing and harmonizing historical narratives prior to their inclusion in the sanctioned annals. Put plainly, I was being positioned as a curator, an alterer of fellow chroniclers' realities. My assigned quarters lay buried in one of the bureaucratic hubs encircling the palace, a cramped chamber devoid of light, ringed by information vaults and cogitator consoles. My duties were straightforward: examine Remembrancer chronicles from the far reaches of the Crusade, compare them to ratified historical frameworks, mark discrepancies or troubling aspects, then amend them or escalate to superiors for adjudication. In essence, I was enlisted to cleanse the past, aiding in the fabrication of a storyline to supplant actuality. The paradox wasn't wasted on me. I, who had beheld verity unraveling right in front of me, was now a mechanism for dismantling others' verities. It felt like retribution masked as advancement, a refined malice befitting intellects transcending mortal bounds. Still, over the ensuing months, I started to notice recurring motifs in the documents that passed under my review. Tales of bizarre occurrences, dispatches depicting the Emperor or the Primarchs wielding powers that eluded rational accounting, episodes where the fabric of existence warped in their vicinity. Each of these demanded elevated scrutiny. Everyone necessitated the utmost degree of alteration. Often, the source remembrancers were discreetly sidelined, deemed victims of mental collapse, or reassigned to isolated posts where their narratives would echo unheard. I wasn't the sole observer who'd glimpsed beyond the shroud, nor the only one muzzled. This insight might have offered solace, perhaps, in the notion of collective weight. Rather, it amplified my unease. The breadth of the cover-up was immense, methodical, not a fleeting effort, but a meticulously orchestrated scheme. What lay shrouded, and for what purpose? The inquiry gnawed at me. Against both directives and gut feeling, I set about assembling a clandestine repository. duplicates of unaltered reports, logs of dismissed remembrancers and the pretexts employed, trends and modifications that could outline the contours of the obscured entity. It was perilous endeavor. Exposure would guarantee swift erasure. I entertained no delusions on that score, yet an inner defiance rose against my conscription into deception. If my personal recollections were to be offered up to the pyre of expedient lore, I'd at least comprehend the cause of my demise. Half a year into this posting, I uncovered something that almost shattered my resolve. Within the batch earmarked for thorough overhaul was a collection of submissions from a remembrancer linked to the Word-Bearers Legion. This person, a female by the name of Serene Valantion, had recorded the subjugation of a planet named Calth. The sanctioned recounting portrayed a hesitant yet essential application of might against a resistant human society that spurned amicable assimilation into the Imperium. Lamentable, yet defensible in pursuit of the broader, the pursuit of unity, served as the stated purpose. Yet the unaltered version painted a starkly contrasting picture. It recounted how the Emperor personally confronted the Primarch Lorgar, who had devoted years to guiding the inhabitants of subjugated planets in revering his father as a divine entity. It detailed not just a simple reprimand for this misstep, but the Emperor compelling the whole Word-Bearers Legion to prostrate themselves amid the ruins of a metropolis they had erected in his name. A metropolis he razed instantly with mere intent. Furthermore, it narrated how, as the Primarch bowed in tears amid the debris, the Emperor exerted an influence upon him not through touch or speech, but solely through sheer volition. Cyrene's narrative framed it as overhauling a core aspect of the Primarch's psyche, akin to an editor amending flaws in a document. The similarities to what I'd observed at Ulanor were impossible to ignore. The effortless exhibition of might that transcended understanding, the total dominion over not only bodies but the fabric of existence. Yet this instance was graver, infinitely more disturbing. For here, the force wasn't aimed at some alien foe. This was the Emperor reshaping the psyche of his own progeny, transforming his essential self as effortlessly as altering text in a book. What manner of entity was capable of such an act? What sort of parent? Those inquiries bordered on blasphemy. I recognized that even at the time, but once posed, they lingered inescapably. They gnawed at my thoughts as I faithfully edited Cyrene's report, substituting her dismayed recounting with neutral accounts of tactical repositioning and bureaucratic reorganization. Throughout I pondered, if the Emperor could achieve this against a Primarch, one of his crafted heirs built to resist mental manipulation, what might he inflict on a mere mortal's consciousness? What might he have already imposed on my own? The idea was crippling. How could I rely on any recollection, any notion, if they might be altered without my awareness? How could I confirm that my very skepticism wasn't an implanted reaction, a mental safeguard meant to expose me? I started scrutinizing my psyche with relentless focus, probing for irregularities, voids, ideas that felt alien to my usual cognition. I uncovered no irrefutable signs. But as the adage goes, lack of proof doesn't prove absence. The uncertainty persisted, grew malignant, turned into an ever-present shadow, and yet I pressed on with my duties, kept assembling my clandestine collection, kept existing beneath the weight of a reality I could neither wholly recall nor entirely erase, a reality concerning the Emperor of mankind that dwarfed any sanctioned creed of godhood in its horror. He wasn't a deity as humanity had long imagined them. He was an otherworldly presence, nameless in our lexicon. And regardless of his nature or his designs for our species, I grew ever more convinced they diverged wildly from the tales we'd been fed. As my tenure on Terra extended from months to years, I established a regimen to mask my personal inquiries. My daylight hours went to unwavering support of the sanctioned history, my evenings to meticulous recording of the truths being suppressed. Within my unassuming habitat module, I built a concealed repository. Data tablets and paper records hidden inside everyday items, their data locked in a code I'd invented myself. It was in this phase that I started detecting the understated monitoring. Nothing blatant, nothing I could irrefutably confirm. A servitor traversing my habitat at the identical hour, nightly. queries for data that tracked my file views and durations, the sporadic sensation of observation while isolated in my study area. I could have brushed it off as suspicion, a byproduct of the burden I bore. But one event persuaded me the scrutiny was genuine. I'd been delving into records of the Council of Nicaea, where the emperor imposed restrictions on psychic abilities in the legions. The approved annals depicted it as a logical discussion, culminating in a prudent and balanced ruling. Magnus and his 1,000 sons reproved for overdependence on warp sorcery, but the Librarius initiative endured in altered state. Still, amid scattered remembrancer testimonies, traces emerged of a far more intense affair. Allusions to the emperor unveiling his psychic prowess in manners that unnerved even the mightiest warp seers among his heirs. Accounts of his verdict resounding not through ears but straight into the psyches of everyone there, with such commanding force that numerous attendees bled from ears and eyes. As I gathered these contradictions, I spotted a silhouette in my study's threshold, a custodian, his auramite plate shining faintly in the low illumination, his guardian spear resting loosely at his hip. He uttered no words, took no actions, simply lingered, observing me for precisely 37 seconds. I tallied them all, rigid in my chair, pulse pounding as if to shatter my ribs. Then, without uttering a single syllable, he pivoted and departed. The intent behind his action struck me with unmistakable force, as if it had been bellowed straight into my thoughts. For the moment, I was permitted to press on, yet I remained under constant scrutiny. That evening, I obliterated a substantial chunk of my collection. Not the entirety. I simply couldn't summon the resolve to wipe out every trace, but sufficient to establish a believable cover if my chambers faced inspection. From then on, I confined my further inquiries to silent recollection, etching links and sequences into my mind instead of committing them to paper or data files. It wasn't much later that the stars started shifting in manners we could never have foreseen. Whispers spread of unease rippling through the ranks, strains between the Gene Lords, with Horus Lupal rising at Olenor to claim the role of War Master, his command over the grand campaign growing more autonomous by the day. Official dispatches brushed these off as overstatements or simple mix-ups, inevitable clashes in an enormous, intricate force spanning innumerable worlds. No cause for ordinary folk to fret, no hint that the Emperor's majestic plan was veering off track. Yet from my vantage, poring over dispatches from every corner of the Imperium, I discerned a contrasting trend taking shape. The anomalies started small. Ventures that missed their reporting deadlines, odd shifts in soldier placements, altered signaling methods lacking solid rationale. Soon after arrived the horror of Istvan, the extermination of 3 steadfast legions at their siblings' hands, the disclosure that Horus, the Emperor's cherished heir, had rebelled against his sire. The dismay that swept Terra was raw and deep-seated. Even those of us nursing secret reservations about the Imperial Creed never dreamed of such treachery. The Primarchs were meant to transcend petty failings, embodiments of the Emperor's ideal, flawlessness shaped into being and drive. If they could crumble, what verdict did that pass on the dream they upheld? As turmoil erupted with Terra bracing for the chance of battle reaching the seat of power, my duties evolved once more. The Bureau for Historical Precision and Truth Assessment transformed in a flash. We weren't just refining the past anymore, we were forging it anew, weaving tales to rationalize the irrational, to rationalize the indefensible. We were instructed to proclaim Horus corrupted, sullied by Xenos meddling or enigmatic warp beings met in the emptiness. His allies among the Primarchs had fallen to similar tricks or pressures. This wasn't a true fracture in the Emperor's endeavor, but an invasion from outside, exploiting lines within. The Emperor stayed beyond reproach, his blueprint pristine. Voicing anything contrary wasn't just wrong, it was hazardous, possibly a sign of faux allegiance. I carried out my tasks. What other option existed? I penned the falsehoods, spread the rhetoric, molded how the masses viewed a war whose real essence I feared was veiled from everyone. Meanwhile, I pursued my hidden probe, linking threads that escaped most observers. The outline that formed was alarming. Almost every case of the Emperor unleashing that world-altering might I'd beheld at Olenor led, often after some time to breakdown or uprising among those nearby, as if brushing against his authentic essence eroded the psyches of even his nearest offspring. Magnus's frantic mind message that ruptured the palace's warp barriers. Logar's gradual slide from truest devotee to inaugural apostate. Angron's untamable fury. Perturabo's simmering grudge. Each had, at some juncture, endured unfiltered mental communion with their progenitor. Each had surfaced altered, shifts that began faintly, but swelled to ruinous proportions. Mere chance, or had they, like me, pierced the human facade the Emperor donned, caught sight of something so profoundly otherworldly, so far removed from our grasp of reality that their enhanced intellects buckled under the weight of that insight? To this day, I hold no firm conclusion, merely hypotheses pieced from scraps of buried reality. Yet I suspect the heresy that almost toppled the Imperium wasn't simply a bid for control or a clash of ambitions. It resembled a mental reflex, a defense against an entity too immense for augmented souls to absorb without fracture. As the heresy advanced and the War Master's hosts clawed nearer to Terra, my efforts turned desperate. The deluge of data requiring cleansing swelled beyond measure. Tales of wondrous deeds by loyalist and renegade primarchs alike. Narratives of space warping amid their clashes. Depictions of beings from warped realms appearing with the insurgents. Most stemmed from panic in the fray or war zone delusion, but concealed. Amid the chaos echoed reports laced with raw dread. Observers recounted how the Primarchs and their legionaries underwent transformations in shape and core being, surging with strength that shattered natural boundaries, yet teetering on the edge of volatility, their traits amplified to perilous extremes, as if the Emperor's forging method was spiraling into frenzy for some and unraveling backward for others. Divergent paths of advancement and regression unfolded at once along varied lines. Pervading every tale lingered a feeling that existence grew pliable, increasingly bent by sheer determination and conviction. The divide between the material realm and the warp thinned further as the strife escalated. It was in this era that the dream returned to me, the identical apparition that had tormented me following Ulanor. Positioned on that barren expanse, observing the Emperor dismantle the Orc with a mere motion, sensing my own self erode from inside, I now perceived the aftermath of that dissolution. Not the void I had dreaded, but assimilation, fusion, the building blocks of my awareness, the framework I knew as my identity, pulled into an immense, elaborate web of fellow psyches. A mental framework of such depth and breadth that it overshadowed the tangible world encircling it. At its core, weaving it into cohesion, channeling its flows, stood he, the Emperor, unveiled not as a mortal or deity, but as an axiom, an elemental power manifested in human guise, unbound and undefined by it. Within the vision, I grasped his endeavor. The grand scheme of the Great Crusade, the Primarchs, the whole imperial endeavor crafted to attain not simple domination or alliance or even bare endurance, but ascension. Humanity's uplift from scattered organic forms into one cohesive psyche empowered to mold the cosmos to its shared intent. A collective psychic exaltation, the Emperor serving as spark and archetype. I stirred from this reverie not gripped by fear, but filled with wonder. In that instant of lucid emergence, I saw the dream's essence clearly. No lone invention of my thoughts, but a broadcast, a shard of insight permitted to embed in my mind. Whether dispatched directly from the Emperor or mere ripple from the swelling warp turmoil, I could not determine, yet its effect ran deep. For the first time since Ulanor, I sensed not only the Emperor's dominion, but its aim. And that aim shone both grander and more horrifying than any human imagination had dared. We were never destined to persist unchanged, never fated to endure as isolated souls with personal musings and distinct paths. We formed the crude substance for a superior creation, a fresh paradigm of being with the Emperor as its soul and intellect. Some might deem this godhood, others would brand it despotism writ large across the stars. I can no longer pinpoint the boundary, All I hold is what I beheld, what I assembled from scraps of censored reality, and what I've embraced through years of contemplation. The Emperor of mankind was never human in the sense we grasp it. He might have sprung from human lineage in some ancient era, might have mingled with us as one of ours across ages untold, but what he developed into, what he transformed to steer our kind, was inherently alien. A psyche so expansive and labyrinthine that it demanded a body custom-built to house it without shattering into the warp. An entity able to sense and alter reality's foundational weaves via unadulterated mental force. A mind functioning across epochs and potentials that render our straight-line views akin to the dim sight of bugs. This, I think, is what I caught sight of at Ulanor. Not just a burst of colossal psychic force, but a fleeting exposure of his authentic self, a short-lived pause in the mental veil that lets others see him in graspable shape. For that one instant, as he erased the orc with a flick, I believe the Emperor ceased the charade of humanity, ceased confining himself to the bodily and chronological limits that shape our lives, and thereby disclosed to those there a verity few could bear. The Primarchs comprehended, I suspect, they who were molded from his very substance, tailored to harness slices of his might. They acknowledged the disclosure because it echoed with an innate element of their superhuman makeup, a kernel of identical ascending promise that had bloomed fully in their maker. That explains their unbidden kneeling, not from adoration or dread alone, but from innate grasp of a cosmic order as fixed as any natural law, and maybe that vision of their ultimate destiny, of the gulf yet spanning them from their ordained end. It was that very moment that sowed the initial sparks of conflict, confronting one's own possible destiny exposed so starkly, grasping the journey of change yet to come, along with the erosion of identity it would demand, would deliver a deep jolt to any mind, even one as resilient as a Primarch's. For someone like me, an ordinary unenhanced mortal, the disclosure proved both narrower in scope and easier to endure, mainly because I didn't possess the ability to grasp its full depth. I perceived only the superficial waves from a turmoil in abyssal realms beyond my reach. Yet even this partial glimpse sufficed to irrevocably redirect my existence, to propel me along this route of concealed exploration and perilous insights. As the siege of Terra loomed and Horus's legions tightened their grip on the Sol system, my duties gained a sharper edge. I had moved beyond merely cleansing records of bygone incidents. Now, I played a direct role in crafting the story of ongoing developments, choosing which elements of the escalating disaster would reach the wider awareness and which would remain buried. It amounted to a sorting of data, safeguarding what was considered vital for upholding spirits in order, while removing anything liable to spark fear or erode trust in the Emperor's inevitable triumph. In reality, we had no assurance that success was within grasp. The magnitude of the disaster confronting the Imperium was without parallel. Fully half its legions had rebelled. The Primarchs stood fractured. Navigation through the warp was crippled by colossal tempests, and leading the renegade host was Horus Lupercal, formerly the sharpest strategic genius of the Great Crusade, now turning his talents against the realm he once forged. Still, within this gloom, an odd serenity enveloped the imperial palace. Attendants nearest to the Emperor noted no traces of worry or doubt from humanity's sovereign. He persisted with his enigmatic endeavor far below the citadel, surfacing sporadically to deliver directives to the Primarchs and commanders overseeing the fortifications. These rare outings drew keen examination from those of us handling communications. Whispers proliferated. Certain voices suggested the Emperor was diminishing in bodily strength, his vitality drained by the secretive labors concealed behind barricaded portals. Counterclaims held that he was transcending his former essence, casting off the final traces of mortal frailty as the turmoil called forth his utmost capabilities. The reality, as I assembled it from scattered accounts and my own cautious vantage points, proved far more intricate. The Emperor was undergoing a shift. That seemed evident, but the essence of that shift resisted easy definition. His outward form stayed unaltered, the same grand silhouette that had guided the Great Crusade. Nevertheless, individuals granted access to him spoke of a growing struggle to hold a steady mental grasp on his being, as if their thoughts recoiled from acknowledging him without willful effort. One suppressed report, quashed right after arrival, likened it to staring into a void in the fabric of being, not a rift or injury, but a deliberate void, a spot where the standard rules of reality had been courteously requested to step aside. What impressed me deepest in these dispatches was their alignment with events I'd observed years before at Olenor. That identical impression of existence curving around a nexus of determination. That same hint of a force functioning on strata surpassing typical psyker abilities. But this time, the force was harnessed with unmatched precision and intent, aimed at an objective none of us could wholly discern. In my formal role, I received orders to highlight the Emperor's assurance and command, portraying him as the unyielding cornerstone of mankind's bulwark, the singular constant amid the swirling defiance against the heresy. This proved straightforward, since, in every visible respect, he embodied precisely that. However, through my personal probing, I started to sense that this steadfast poise arose not from assured battlefield success, but from a viewpoint that viewed the whole heresy, devastating as it was, as just one piece in a grander scheme, an essential stage in mankind's guided ascent. I must stress that this remained my own speculation. Perilous speculation I confided to nobody, yet it fitted the sequence of disclosures I'd gathered across the years, aligning with the prophetic dream of humanity's psychic ascension, with innumerable subtle remarks and deeds from the Emperor that only cohered if one presumed he followed a schedule stretching well past the pressing turmoil. As the assault on Terra ignited fully, with Horus's armada claiming orbital dominance and launching strikes against the palace barriers, a fresh category of dispatch started arriving at my desk. Frontline bulletins recounting episodes where the very structure of reality appeared to twist and buckle near zones of especially fierce combat. Time-streaming phenomena unfolded at uneven paces across various fronts of the identical war zone. Substances acted in defiance of standard laws of physics, injuries defying explanation from ordinary armaments, the boundary separating metaphor from tangible fact dissolving until they merged into something inseparable in practice. Many such occurrences I was directed to attribute to delusions born of exhaustion and terror, or as side effects from arcane armaments or alien innovations unleashed by the rebels. Yet I understood the reality more deeply. I had witnessed the Emperor dismantle an orc through a mere motion. I had experienced existence warping under his command on Ulanor. These emerging anomalies represented merely those same mechanisms at play on a vaster level, though with diminished accuracy. The barrier dividing the material realm from the warp grew ever more fragile as the strife escalated. Within that transitional phase, the raw force of determination and conviction emerged as a rising influence in molding the corporeal world. I eventually concluded this was simultaneously the heresy's most profound threat and its underlying objective. Not merely the seizure of the Imperium or the slaying of the Emperor, but the harnessing of mankind's shared mental prowess into an instrument of inconceivable might, an instrument capable of altering the fabric of being. Horus aimed to grasp that instrument for his personal elevation. The Emperor envisioned it for an altogether different end. And positioned amid these two superhuman determinations, the structure of reality itself started to fracture. The climax of this struggle, the ultimate clash between sire and offspring, stands as a documented episode, or at least one rendition of it, involving the Emperor and his steadfast primarchs beaming onto Horus's flagship. The frantic melee across tainted corridors, the climactic showdown where the Emperor suffered severe harm, yet prevailed in the end. Horus eradicated in flesh and spirit alike. The hard-won success that reduced humanity's sovereign to a shattered remnant, preserved solely by the mechanical wonder of the Golden Throne. This forms the account I contributed to forging in the wake. The sanctioned version disseminated throughout the Imperium amid the Reconstruction era that ensued. A sorrowful saga of devotion and hard-fought glory, destined to underpin the foundational legend for 10,000 years of imperial governance. It holds grains of verity, yet falls short of the complete account. I never set foot on the vengeful spirit. I never beheld the decisive encounter between the emperor and his wayward progeny. Only a handful did, and even fewer endure to recount their observations, but from my vantage, I could review the raw testimonies of those who made it back. Testimonies gathered prior to the solidification of the authorized tale, before the ecclesiarchy ascended to enshrine the emperor's godhood, before the stark pragmatism of a non-religious dominion evolved into the rigid theocracy of today's Imperium. These reports, though disjointed and at odds, sketched a scene far removed from the established chronicle. They portrayed not a mere bodily skirmish between the emperor and Horus, even if such an exchange might have appeared that way to constrained superhuman perceptions. Instead, they depicted a multifaceted war across layers of being at once, a duel of psyches that materialized bodily, but resolved in a mental domain eluding ordinary grasp. From the most lucid of these statements, delivered by a gravely injured custodian who had joined the emperor on the warship, the closing instance of the clash featured an odd tranquility. Horus and the emperor confronting one another in a room twisted by forces beyond mortal handling. Surrounding them, the flow of time appeared to halt, not in ice, but in suspense, poised to observe the pivot of fate's scale. Then the emperor acted in an unforeseen manner, one that challenged the immediate battle rationale and the broader campaign demands. He paused, notwithstanding Horus's manifold atrocities. Despite the trillions perished, the Imperium ablaze, the vision of the Great Crusade in ruins, despite his devoted sons felled by fraternal betrayal, despite teetering on utter collapse, the emperor paused. The custodian's report implies this stemmed not from residual affection or fatherly aversion to unmaking his supreme work. Rather, it marked a phase of true doubt, as if the Lord of humanity, designer of its path, forger of its fate, confronted an unforeseen juncture, confronted with a decision whose repercussions even his boundless mind could not wholly foresee. In that instant of pause, Horus lashed out. Not bodily, although doubtless some strike afflicted the emperor's physical shell, but mentally, channeling the full vigor of his superhuman resolve alongside whatever chaotic beings had fueled his uprising. The assault ought to have ended it. By every description, it nearly did. The emperor endured injuries surpassing mere corporeal damage. His core, the vast mental framework. The lecture I had briefly seen in my dream, that profound insight, was torn apart along fissures that might have lingered from his shift from ordinary mortal to the enigmatic entity he had evolved into. But right then, on the brink of utter ruin, as triumph appeared poised in Horus's hands, a shift occurred. The custodian's narrative grows murkier at this point, slipping into metaphorical expressions and sacred motifs that seem like efforts to convey sensations too immense for even enhanced human senses to grasp. Still, its essence matches the scattered pieces I've assembled across years of quiet research. In his utmost fragility, the emperor ceased restraining himself, abandoned the confines of shapes and roles that mere humans or even superhumans could fathom. He dropped the facade of being just the mightiest force in the stars and instead embodied fully what he genuinely represents. The impact was apocalyptic. The fabric of reality inside the chamber crumbled away, dissolving into what one custodian termed utter void, and then flawless clarity, the cessation of every potential and the emergence of one unyielding reality. Once normal awareness returned, Horus had vanished. Not slain, not overcome, not exiled, but erased, stripped from being so completely that the chaotic forces sustaining him fell silent. As if he had never existed, his very blueprint scrubbed from the core framework of the cosmos. Yet the price matched that totality. The emperor, by revealing a facet of his authentic essence too immense for his crafted body to hold, devolved into a condition worse than death but not quite existence. His mind splintered, his energies dispersed through unseen realms, his corporeal shell a shattered relic sustained solely by extreme mechanical aids. The golden throne, meant for another role in the emperor's vast scheme, turned into his vital lifeline and cage, a mechanism to tether the shards of his psyche, to halt their total unraveling into the warp, and to sustain the crucial mental duties he had long provided for mankind. This, I suspect, forms the crux of the Horus heresy and the bedrock of today's Imperium. Not merely a clash of fidelity against betrayal, nor a basic story of a sire undone by his offspring, but a deeper, more unsettling truth. A crucial turning point in humanity's collective evolution, guided over eons by an entity whose real essence and aims stay utterly beyond our grasp, even for those he seeks to uplift. A scheme thrown off course not by the uprising alone, but by the unforeseen decisions in its closing throes. This is the conviction I've formed through years of concealed investigation. What I've stitched from bits of censored accounts, from trends in censored chronicles, and from my own fleeting peek beyond the curtain during Ulanor. And this explains my enduring dread ever since. For grasping even this degree of knowledge carries risks beyond reckoning. To voice it openly, heresy under every measure. But with my own demise drawing near, I feel driven to document these revelations. Not as absolute certainty, how could I presume to unravel the plans of such a presence, but as a caution and viewpoint that could benefit future seekers. The Emperor isn't deceased, nor fully vital in our familiar sense. He persists in a realm outside standard labels, his awareness both divided and whole across diverse layers of reality. The Golden Throne upholds the remnants of his tangible body while acting as a stabilizer for his dispersed spirit. Even in this weakened form, his might defies calculation. The Astronomicon has blazed for 10,000 years, fueled by the mental force he still produces amid his broken state. The founding and persistence of the Sisters of Silence, the unending battle against warp invasions, all sustained by the sliver of his actual potency that lingers reachable now. In the years following the heresy, I've frequently pondered if this result genuinely surprised the Emperor, if the seeming collapse of his overarching plan was actually its realization through alternate routes. Reflect on the Imperium in its present shape, a vast interstellar faith centered on one revered icon. Billions of lives channeled toward a shared goal, their combined mental strength honed by pious zeal, belief, and ceremony, steering human thought along set courses across eras. Doesn't this echo, in a way, the collective psychic harmony I foresaw in my dream, not via the rational progressive enlightenment the Emperor first championed, but through the raw, selective force of endless conflict and the mental lens of devout worship? The approaches diverge. The duration stretches immeasurably, the toll on humanity soars beyond count. B. Yet the underlying trajectory aligns with what I suspect was the Emperor's grandest ambition, forging humanity into a singular psychic collective empowered to mold existence via shared intent. The Imperium's apparent decline over 10 millennia into myth and inertia could actually represent an essential interim in an ongoing transformation. Envisioned by its creator as a protective chrysalis where our species' latent abilities incubate, shielded by veils of misinformation and rigid creeds from perils it cannot yet confront outright. Should this hypothesis hold weight, it prompts unsettling inquiries into the essence of the entity we term the Emperor, into the profound scope of vision demanded by such orchestration, into the ethical reckoning that could rationalize such widespread agony for the sake of that ultimate aim. Inquiries beyond my capacity to address, queries that maybe no mortal intellect can fully articulate, much less unravel. The sole certainty I possess stems from what unfolded on that arid battlefield at Ulanor. The effortless dissolution of a foe through a mere motion, the unchallenged command over the fabric of existence. A force potent enough to unsettle deities and drive mortals to crave oblivion. And I recognize that even that spectacle, staggering as it seemed, captured but the tiniest sliver of the Emperor's authentic nature, a brief, contained easing of the mental barriers that let him engage with mundane matter without annihilating it. Through decades of covert exploration and perilous contemplation, I've arrived at the conviction that the figure we hail as the Emperor of mankind might herald the dawn of a novel form of being, transcending both humanity and divinity as we've known them, emerging as a sovereign awareness spanning realms and governed by principles beyond our grasp. The pioneer, yes, but designed not to remain solitary. For I hold that our kind was destined to pursue him, surpassing our present bounds to partake in the existential realm he has forged. That intent fueled the Great Crusade, underpinned the imperial truth, and drove the Webway initiative, each element a vital strand in an immense blueprint to steer our race across an evolutionary chasm no fleshly mind has ever endured. It might persist even yet. Even fractured and enshrined upon the throne, the Emperor could be steering us onward through methods too intricate and indirect for our detection. In its harsh, tyrannical splendor, the Imperium may continue fulfilling its ordained role in uplifting the species. Or maybe the blueprint has truly collapsed. Maybe we wander isolated amid a cosmos of horrors, guarded solely by the splintered echoes of an inscrutable presence against oblivion. I cannot say. Such knowledge eludes me. Revelations like these dwell outside the grasp of thoughts tethered to standard laws of matter and linear progression. What I can affirm is only what I've recounted herein, my modest peek beyond the shroud of the world. The recollection I wasn't meant to keep, the links I wasn't supposed to forge. And as I ready myself to carry these perilous revelations into the unknown of death, I feel both dread and an odd solace from one parting reflection. If my views on the Emperor ring even somewhat true, if he indeed senses through multiple dimensions and maneuvers across vast expanses of chronology and potential that eclipse our straightforward lives, then he has forever anticipated that Ulanor memory lingering in me, foreseen that I'd devote my existence to probing the realities concealed by the imperial veneer, predicted that I'd one day commit these blasphemous musings to record. And he permitted it. The mystery tormenting my waning hours is why. Why tolerate such hazardous awareness persisting, no matter how concealed? Why let a single obscure chronicler glimpse through the shroud, even fleetingly? It could be that my endeavors are too negligible to merit notice from such an entity, a minor flaw unworthy of the effort to excise. Or, and this notion freezes me to the core, the safeguarding and dissemination of these scattered revelations might fulfill some role in the Emperor's enigmatic scheme. Perhaps skepticism itself forms an indispensable part of our directed ascent, a foil to unquestioning devotion, a spark of intellectual variance in a lineage molded toward oneness. I cannot say. Such knowledge eludes me. Soon enough, I'll merge with the countless departed, my personal awareness dissolving back into the overarching weave the cosmos constructs. But prior to that, I deposit this account of my Ulanor observations and the deductions born from a life steeped in prohibited scrutiny. The Emperor's might isn't mere genesis or annihilation, although he employs both as needed. Nor is it mere mental supremacy or mechanical prowess, despite these being his instruments. His genuine authority, I suspect, resides in total sovereignty over the very substance of being, the sort that causes gods to quiver, and men long for blindness in his presence. And whatever his authentic essence might be, whatever grand design he harbors for our species, one conviction grips me unyieldingly. It eclipses in scope, alienness, and dread everything our frail intellects could ever fabricate. Even after a span of 10,000 years since his corporeal shell shattered and his awareness splintered, I sense his gaze sweeping over the Imperium, discerning intricate webs beyond our grasp, subtly steering occurrences down paths we cannot foresee, steering humankind toward destinies beyond our wildest visions. Or, in the most harrowing possibility, merely observing as we flail and perish by the trillions, upholding the savage Darwinian forces essential to mold us into the form destiny demands. This conviction stems from what I've assembled through my singular encounters and perilous probes. I present it not as indisputable fact, how dare I presume to fathom such an entity's psyche, but as an angle, the account of someone who, if only for a fleeting and flawed instant, peered past the shroud of a presence we fail to fully grasp, even after 10 millennia of veneration. The Emperor of mankind embodies raw dominion. Yet the essence of that dominion and the intent driving its use throughout mortal annals stand as the profoundest enigma of our being, an enigma I now bequeath to successors as I diminish into whatever lies outside his radiant glow. Be it utter erasure of the self or merger into a vaster expanse, I approach it clear-eyed, having beheld more verity than most ever dare. I am Jalan Ma. I stood witness at Olnor when the Emperor unveiled a sliver of his profound self. I beheld him dissolve a foe with a mere motion. I endured his scrutiny washing over me, laying bare every concealed notion and recollection to his boundless insight. And from that moment, I've carried the burden of realizing that the entity we deem Lord of humanity surpasses by leagues the deity we've fashioned in our image, vastly superior and infinitely more fearsome. Heed these words, if they endure. The Emperor shields, but the threats he wards off, the motives behind it, and the ultimate toll exacted pose riddles whose solutions could fracture the Imperium more decisively than any foe from without. Beneath his radiance, we exist and expire by schemes defying our ken. And therein, perchance, resides the pinnacle of his might. For what sovereignty commands greater finality than one exempt from justification? What rule achieves fuller grasp than one that molds the very outlooks of those it governs? What force inspires deeper horror than one capable of unraveling existence with a whim and reshaping the psyches of near divines with a look? I depart with this parting insight, forged from a life veiled in secret scrutiny and hazardous contemplation. The Emperor isn't a despot through mere imposition of might. He is one because, to him, no divide exists between his intent and the fabric of existence, between his aspirations and actuality, between the path he's decreed for humanity and the inexorable march of universal decree. Such is the insight I caught at Ulanor, the epiphany that has shadowed me across 6 decades, the wisdom I now yield to the oblivion or oneness that death promises. The Emperor of mankind isn't a deity feigning mortality. He is something profoundly more alarming. He is the cosmos roused to sentience and intent, opting to embody itself in human guise for motives utterly beyond our finite grasp. And we, devotee and betrayer both, serve merely as threads in the weave of his unfolding blueprint.